The sound of a dying engine cutting through the quiet Wednesday afternoon in Millbrook was nothing unusual. Jacob Martinez had heard every possible mechanical death rattle from his driveway workshop over the past 5 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But the distinctive purr-to-wheeze of what sounded like European engineering made him look up from the Honda Civic he was working on. What rolled to a stop outside his chain-link fence wasn't the usual neighborhood sedan or pickup truck. It was a cherry-red Ferrari 488, steam rising from its hood like morning mist, and behind the wheel sat a woman who looked as out of place in his working-class neighborhood as diamonds in a toolbox. Jacob wiped his oil-stained hands on his coveralls and watched as the woman stepped out of the exotic car. Her tailored business suit probably cost more than he made in 3 months, and her frustrated expression suggested she was having the kind of day where a broken supercar was just another inconvenience in a life of perfectly scheduled chaos. She pulled out her phone, clearly expecting to call for premium roadside assistance, but her face fell as she stared at the screen. No signal. The cell tower had been down in this part of Millbrook for 2 weeks, a fact that wouldn't matter much to someone who usually traveled in corridors of perfect connectivity. Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, peeked out from the garage where she'd been organizing his socket wrenches by size, a task she'd assigned herself to help Daddy's business run smoother. She had that natural curiosity that children possess, the kind that sees adventure in unexpected visitors and possibilities in broken things. Jacob caught her eye and nodded toward the house, a silent instruction she understood immediately. When strangers appeared, especially expensive strangers, Emma knew to give her father space to assess the situation. The woman in the suit finally gave up on her phone and approached the fence. Her heels clicked against the cracked sidewalk with military precision, each step betraying a confidence that came from a lifetime of problems that could be solved with the right amount of money or influence. But mechanical problems, Jacob had learned, didn't care about bank accounts or business cards. They required patience, knowledge, and hands willing to get dirty. Jacob straightened up as the woman reached his fence, noting how she carefully avoided touching the gate's weathered metal with her manicured fingers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that suggested boardroom presentations and quarterly reports. But her brown eyes held a vulnerability that expensive clothes couldn't quite mask. She looked like someone who controlled million-dollar deals but had never changed a tire. Someone who commanded respect in glass towers but found herself completely out of her element on a residential street where children's bicycles leaned against oak trees and the smell of barbecue drifted from backyard grills. "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice carrying the crisp diction of private schools and Ivy League education. "My car seems to have broken down, and I noticed you have what appears to be an automotive repair operation here." She gestured toward his driveway setup with the careful politeness of someone trying not to offend, while clearly questioning whether this informal arrangement could possibly help with her sophisticated machinery. Almost smiled at her diplomatic phrasing. Automotive repair operation. Most people just called it fixing cars in his driveway, which was exactly what it was. He'd been running this business since Emma was 2, after the layoffs at Henderson Manufacturing left him with a choice between relocating for uncertain prospects or staying put and betting on his mechanical skills. The neighborhood had been skeptical at first.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
A divorced father with calloused hands and a toddler daughter setting up shop in a residential area competing with established garages that had customer waiting areas and computerized diagnostic equipment, but word had spread quickly that Jacob Martinez could resurrect dead transmissions, coax life from failing engines, and explain complex problems in terms that didn't require a mechanical engineering degree to understand. More importantly, he charged fair prices, worked honest hours, and treated every customer's transportation needs with the same respect, whether they drove a rusted pickup truck or a pristine luxury sedan. His reputation had grown organically, built on referrals from satisfied customers who appreciated finding someone who saw car repair as craftsmanship rather than just another transaction. The Ferrari's owner continued to study his setup with barely concealed uncertainty. His tools were professional grade, but worn from use. His workspace organized, but clearly improvised. No climate-controlled service bays, no hydraulic lifts, no computerized diagnostic stations blinking with multicolored status lights. Just a man, his tools, and 5 years of building trust, one repair at a time. To someone accustomed to valet parking and premium service departments, it probably looked like amateur hour. Jacob walked to the fence, wiping his hands one final time before extending one toward her. "Jacob Martinez, what seems to be the problem with your car?" His tone was neither deferential nor challenging, simply professional. He'd learned that treating every customer with the same straightforward respect eliminated most complications before they could develop. Rich or poor, everyone wanted their car to run properly, and everyone deserved to understand what was wrong with it. She hesitated for just a moment before shaking his hand, her grip firm despite her obvious reservations about the informal nature of their meeting. "Victoria Sterling. The engine started making unusual noises about 10 miles back, and now there's steam coming from under the hood. I was trying to reach the Ferrari dealership, but apparently cell service is spotty in this area." Her frustration was evident, but Jacob detected something else in her voice. A weariness that went deeper than automotive troubles, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying responsibilities that never paused for inconvenient breakdowns. "Mind if I take a look?" Jacob asked, already moving toward the gate. "No obligation. Sometimes it's something simple that can get you back on the road quickly. Sometimes it's more complicated. Either way, you'll know what you're dealing with." Victoria stepped back as he opened the gate and approached her car, his trained eye already assessing the situation from the sound of the cooling engine and the pattern of steam escaping from the hood. Jacob had worked on exactly 3 Ferraris in his 5 years of driveway mechanics, but engines were engines, and problems revealed themselves through universal languages of sound, smell, and behavior that transcended brand names and price tags. As he popped the hood and leaned in to examine the intricate machinery beneath, Jacob became aware that this moment would later divide his life into before and after. Not because of the car, though the Ferrari would prove significant in ways he couldn't yet imagine, but because of the woman standing beside him, checking her watch with the nervous energy of someone whose schedule had just been derailed by circumstances beyond her control. Victoria Sterling was about to become much more than an unexpected customer, though neither of them could have predicted the extraordinary chain of events that would unfold from this simple breakdown in his working-class neighborhood. The cooling system problem turned out to be more complex than Jacob initially diagnosed. What appeared to be a simple thermostat failure revealed itself as a cascading issue involving the water pump, several seals, and a radiator that had been slowly deteriorating for months. Victoria Sterling's pristine Ferrari had been hiding its mechanical vulnerabilities beneath layers of automotive perfection, much like its owner seemed to conceal her own uncertainties behind designer clothing and corporate confidence. "The parts alone will cost around $3,000, Jacob explained, standing beside the opened hood as afternoon shadows lengthened across his driveway. "That's wholesale pricing through my supplier network. A dealership would probably double that, plus labor charges that could push the total repair cost close to $8,000. He watched her face carefully, expecting the usual shock that accompanied expensive automotive diagnoses, but Victoria merely nodded with the resignation of someone accustomed to premium pricing for everything in her life. "How long will the repairs take?" she asked, consulting the gold watch that probably cost more than Jacob's monthly mortgage payment. Her question carried the urgency of someone whose schedule operated in increments measured by quarterly profit margins and board meeting deadlines, not the leisurely pace of neighborhood automotive repair. "5 business days, assuming no complications," Jacob replied. "I'll need to special order most of these components, and Ferrari parts don't exactly flow through standard distribution channels.
My supplier has connections with authorized dealers, but it requires patience and precision. This isn't the kind of repair you want rushed." Victoria's expression suggested that patience wasn't her strongest virtue, but she seemed to recognize the reality of her situation. Millbrook's public transportation consisted of a single bus route that connected to the metro system 20 miles away, and ride-sharing services rarely ventured into their working-class neighborhood. Her world of private cars and executive assistants had collided with the practical limitations of suburban automotive repair, leaving her temporarily stranded in a community she'd probably never noticed from the highway that connected it to her usual destinations. "There's a decent motel about 2 miles from here," Jacob offered, sensing her unspoken concern about accommodations. "The Millbrook Inn. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. Mrs. Patterson runs it, and she'll take good care of you. I can give you a ride over there once I get Emma settled for the evening." The mention of his daughter seemed to catch Victoria's attention. Throughout their conversation, she'd occasionally glanced toward the house where Emma had positioned herself at the front window, clearly curious about the elegant woman whose broken car had disrupted their routine Wednesday afternoon. Children possessed an uncanny ability to sense when adults were navigating unfamiliar social territory, and Emma's watchful presence suggested she understood that this interaction was different from their usual customer encounters. "Your daughter," Victoria observed, following his gaze toward the window where Emma waved tentatively. "She seems very well behaved. Does she always help you with your work?" Jacob smiled at the question, recognizing genuine curiosity rather than polite small talk. "Emma's been part of this operation since the beginning. She's got an instinct for organization that puts most adults to shame, and she's developing a decent understanding of basic automotive systems. Sometimes I think she absorbs more from watching than most people learn from formal instruction." "That's impressive," Victoria replied, and Jacob detected a note of something that might have been longing in her voice. It must be rewarding to share your expertise with her, to know she's learning skills that will serve her throughout her life. Not everyone gets that kind of practical education from their parents. The comment carried weight that extended beyond casual conversation, suggesting depths of personal experience that Victoria hadn't intended to reveal. Jacob had learned to recognize the subtle indicators that people carried complicated relationships with their own families, the careful way they spoke about childhood experiences that hadn't matched their expectations or needs. His customers often shared more than they intended while waiting for their cars to be diagnosed, as if the vulnerability of mechanical breakdown lowered their usual social defenses. Over the following days, as Jacob worked methodically through the Ferrari's repairs, Victoria established an unexpected routine in Millbrook. Rather than remaining sequestered at the motel, she began appearing at his driveway each morning around 10 o'clock, carrying coffee from the local diner and settling herself on the folding lawn chair he provided for customers who preferred to observe the repair process. Her business attire gradually relaxed into more practical clothing, though even her casual wear probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Emma, initially shy around the sophisticated stranger, began warming to Victoria's genuine interest in her activities. Victoria asked thoughtful questions about Emma's drawings, praised her organizational skills, and listened with remarkable patience to 7-year-old explanations of automotive concepts she was still mastering. The interaction revealed a side of Victoria that contrasted sharply with her initial corporate demeanor, a warmth and attentiveness that suggested natural maternal instincts carefully controlled by professional necessity. "You're very patient with her," Jacob observed one afternoon, as Victoria helped Emma sort his collection of specialty sockets into size order. "Not everyone has the temperament for extended conversations about the differences between metric and standard threading." Victoria laughed, a sound that transformed her entire appearance and made her seem years younger. "Honestly, I'm learning as much from her as she is from our conversations. I never had exposure to any of this growing up. My family believed that practical skills were for other people, that success meant hiring experts rather than developing expertise yourself. The comment opened a window into her background that Jacob found intriguing. Most of his customers came from working families, where automotive knowledge was passed down through generations, where understanding your vehicle's needs was a practical necessity rather than an intellectual curiosity. Victoria's obvious intelligence and quick grasp of mechanical concepts suggested capabilities that had been channeled exclusively toward academic and professional achievements, leaving gaps in practical knowledge that she seemed eager to address. "What kind of work keeps you traveling through Millbrook?" Jacob asked, genuinely curious about the circumstances that had brought her expensive car through his neighborhood. The question had been nagging at him since their first meeting, as his area wasn't exactly on the route between major business centers or luxury destinations. Victoria hesitated before answering, her fingers stilling on the socket she'd been examining. "I was actually heading to a private investigation firm about 30 miles from here. There's something I've been trying to resolve for several years now, a family matter that requires professional assistance to navigate properly." The careful way she phrased her explanation suggested layers of complexity she wasn't ready to share, but Jacob recognized the tone of someone carrying a burden that extended beyond typical business concerns. He'd learned not to push for details that people weren't prepared to offer, understanding that trust developed at its own pace and couldn't be rushed through direct questioning. "Family matters can be the most challenging to resolve," he said simply, focusing on the water pump assembly he was installing while giving her space to share more if she chose to do so. "This particular situation has been complicated by time and circumstances," Victoria continued, her voice taking on a distant quality that suggested she was speaking more to herself than to him. "Sometimes the people we most need to find are the ones who've learned to remain hidden, whether by choice or necessity." The cryptic nature of her statement intrigued Jacob, but he sensed that pursuing the topic would close down the conversation rather than develop it further. Instead, he continued working while she returned to helping Emma, creating a comfortable silence that allowed all of them to process the subtle intimacy of shared tasks and growing familiarity. The afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees lining his street, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across their improvised workspace, while the sounds of neighborhood life provided a peaceful backdrop to their unusual collaboration. The morning of the fourth day brought unexpected complications that would test everything Jacob and Victoria had built between them. Jacob arrived at his driveway workshop to find Detective Rodriguez from the Metro Police Fraud Division examining Victoria's Ferrari with the methodical attention of someone conducting an official investigation. The detective's presence transformed the comfortable routine they'd established into something that felt suddenly dangerous and uncertain. "Mr. Martinez," Detective Rodriguez said, approaching with the measured gait of someone delivering unwelcome news. "I need to ask you some questions about your current customer and the vehicle you're repairing. This Ferrari was reported stolen from a private collection in Harbor Heights 3 weeks ago, and the owner's offering a substantial reward for its recovery." Jacob felt the ground shift beneath his feet as the detective's words registered. Victoria had been nothing but straightforward about her car troubles, patient with Emma, and genuinely interested in learning about automotive repair. The idea that she might be involved in something criminal seemed impossible to reconcile with the woman who'd spent hours organizing his tool collection and listening to his daughter's enthusiastic explanations of socket wrench applications. "There must be some mistake," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "Victoria Sterling is the legitimate owner. She has registration papers, insurance documentation, everything properly documented. I've seen all the paperwork myself." The detective nodded with the weary patience of someone who'd heard similar protests countless times. "Registration and insurance can be forged, Mr. Martinez. The VIN number on this vehicle matches a car stolen from the Blackstone Collection, a private automotive museum.
The thieves were sophisticated enough to create convincing documentation, but they couldn't change the fundamental identity of the vehicle. The implications of the detective's statement crashed over Jacob like ice water. If Victoria was involved in grand theft auto, his cooperation with her repairs would make him an accessory after the fact. His business license, his custody arrangement with Emma, his entire carefully constructed life could crumble because he'd trusted the wrong person. The detective's presence in his driveway would spread through the neighborhood within hours, and the reputation he'd spent 5 years building would be destroyed by association with stolen property. Victoria arrived at 10 o'clock as usual, carrying coffee and wearing the relaxed expression of someone anticipating another peaceful day of automotive education. The sight of the police detective standing beside her Ferrari froze her in place, coffee cups forgotten in her hands as she processed the scene before her. Jacob watched her face transform from confusion to recognition to something that looked remarkably like resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment for longer than anyone realized. "Miss Sterling," Detective Rodriguez said, approaching her with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask his suspicion. "I'm Detective Rodriguez with Metro Police. I need to speak with you about your vehicle and its registration history. There seem to be some discrepancies that require clarification." Victoria set the coffee cups on Jacob's workbench with careful precision, her movements controlled despite the obvious stress of the situation. "Of course, Detective. I'm happy to provide any documentation you need. My attorney can be here within the hour, if that would be helpful." Mention of attorneys sent another wave of concern through Jacob's mind. Innocent people didn't typically require legal representation for simple vehicle registration questions, and Victoria's immediate offer of legal assistance suggested she understood the seriousness of whatever complications had brought law enforcement to his driveway. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the unusual activity, but sensing enough tension to remain at a safe distance. Jacob caught her eye and gestured toward the house, silently communicating that this wasn't the time for her usual curiosity about their work. His daughter's disappointed expression cut through his chest, but protecting her from whatever was unfolding had to take priority over maintaining their normal routine. "Mr. Martinez," Detective Rodriguez continued, turning his attention back to Jacob, "I'll need a complete accounting of the work you've performed on this vehicle, including any modifications or repairs that might have altered its original condition. The owner of the stolen car is particularly concerned about maintaining the vehicle's collector value, so documentation will be essential for insurance purposes." Jacob nodded, his mind racing through the implications of the detective's request. The repairs he'd performed were substantial enough to affect the car's value, and if Victoria wasn't the legitimate owner, he might be liable for damages regardless of his innocent intentions. The legal complexities of the situation were beyond his expertise, but the potential consequences were clear enough to fill him with dread. "There's something you need to understand," Victoria said suddenly, her voice cutting through the growing tension with surprising firmness. "This situation is more complicated than it appears, and Mr. Martinez is completely innocent of any wrongdoing. He's performed legitimate repairs on what he believed to be legitimately owned property, based on documentation that appeared authentic." Detective Rodriguez studied Victoria's face with the penetrating attention of someone trained to detect deception in high-stakes situations. "Miss Sterling, if you have information that clarifies this situation, now would be the appropriate time to share it. Obstruction of justice charges can be more serious than the original theft, depending on the circumstances involved." The detective's warning hung in the morning air like smoke from a distant fire, suggesting dangers that hadn't yet fully manifested, but threatened to consume everything in their path. Jacob found himself caught between his growing feelings for Victoria and the practical reality that those feelings might have been built on fundamental deceptions he'd been too trusting to recognize. Victoria looked directly at Jacob,
her eyes holding a mixture of apology and determination that suggested she was about to reveal truths that would change everything between them. Detective Rodriguez, the reason this situation is complicated is because the Blackstone collection isn't what it appears to be, and neither am I. This Ferrari wasn't stolen in the conventional sense, but recovering it legally has required methods that might appear questionable to someone who doesn't understand the full context. The cryptic nature of her explanation only deepened Jacob's confusion and concern. Either Victoria was involved in something genuinely criminal, or she was caught up in circumstances so complex that the truth itself had become a liability. In either case, the woman he'd been falling for was not who she'd claimed to be, and the foundation of trust they'd built was cracking under the weight of revelations he wasn't prepared to process. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Jacob's driveway as Victoria's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Catherine Walsh, spread documents across his workbench,
The precision of someone preparing for battle. Detective Rodriguez had agreed to postpone any arrests pending the review of evidence that Victoria claimed would explain the complicated ownership history of the Ferrari. But his skeptical expression suggested he was expecting elaborate justifications for what appeared to be straightforward theft. The Blackstone collection, Catherine began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to presenting complex cases to judges and juries, is owned and operated by Richard Blackstone, a man who has spent the last 15 years systematically acquiring assets through fraudulent means, including the theft of inheritance properties from children who were separated from their families through illegal adoption schemes. Jacob felt his world tilt as the attorney's words registered. The comfortable reality he'd inhabited just hours earlier, where his biggest concern was completing a complex automotive repair, had been replaced by something that sounded like a conspiracy thriller. He glanced at Emma, who was watching from the front porch with the wide-eyed fascination of childhood encountering adult complications she couldn't fully understand. "Miss Sterling is not a thief," Catherine continued, producing a thick folder of legal documents. "She is the rightful heir to several vehicles in the Blackstone collection, including this Ferrari, which belonged to her late father's estate before Richard Blackstone manipulated adoption records and inheritance laws to claim ownership. Victoria has been working with private investigators and legal experts for 3 years to recover property that was stolen from her family through systematic fraud." Detective Rodriguez examined the documents with the methodical attention of someone trained to spot forgeries and fabrications. Birth certificates, adoption records, inheritance documents, and private investigator reports created a paper trail that stretched back decades, telling a story of family separation and financial manipulation that Jacob found difficult to process. "According to these records," the detective said slowly, "Victoria Sterling was born Victoria Blackstone, separated from her younger brother Marcus during a contested custody battle when she was 12 years old, and subsequently adopted by the Sterling family after her biological parents died in an automobile accident. The adoption was arranged through agencies that Richard Blackstone controlled, allowing him to claim guardianship over family assets while the children were placed in separate homes." The revelation struck Jacob with unexpected force. Victoria's mysterious references to family matters and her obvious emotional pain when discussing her past suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been pursuing abstract legal issues or business complications. She had been searching for her lost brother, while simultaneously fighting to recover the inheritance that had been stolen from both of them through systematic manipulation of legal systems designed to protect vulnerable children. "The private investigation firm I was visiting," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional weight of her revelations, "has finally located Marcus. He's been living under his adoptive name, completely unaware of his original identity or the inheritance that belongs to him. Richard Blackstone ensured that all records of the siblings' connection were sealed or destroyed, making it nearly impossible for them to find each other naturally. Jacob stared at Victoria, processing the implications of everything she just revealed. The composed businesswoman who'd been helping Emma organize socket wrenches was actually someone who'd spent years battling sophisticated fraud while searching for her lost brother. The expensive clothes and corporate confidence weren't markers of inherited wealth, but evidence of success she'd achieved while fighting to recover what had been stolen from her family through systematic manipulation of legal systems designed to protect vulnerable children.
Original identity. Approaching him will require careful planning to avoid traumatic revelation of information he's unprepared to process. Catherine Walsh produced another document from her collection, this one bearing the letterhead of a private investigation firm. Marcus Rodriguez, age 28, currently works as an automotive engineer for a specialty restoration company in Harbor Heights. He was adopted at age 8 by the Rodriguez family after being told his parents died in an accident and he had no surviving relatives. He's been successful in his career, specializing in European performance vehicles, but he's always felt something was missing from his understanding of his own history. The name Rodriguez struck Jacob like lightning. Harbor Heights was less than 40 miles from Millbrook, and automotive engineering specializing in European vehicles was exactly the kind of expertise that would explain someone's natural understanding of Ferrari systems. The coincidences were piling up in ways that suggested something more than random chance was operating in their situation. "Detective," Jacob said slowly, his mind racing through connections he was only beginning to understand. "Your name is Rodriguez, and you mentioned Harbor Heights earlier. Are you familiar with the automotive restoration industry in that area? Specifically, someone named Marcus Rodriguez who works with Ferrari systems?" Detective Rodriguez's expression shifted from professional interest to personal concern. "Marcus Rodriguez is my nephew. He was adopted by my brother's family when he was 8 years old, after his parents died in what we were told was a tragic accident. He's always been passionate about automotive work, but he's also struggled with questions about his early childhood that none of us could answer because the adoption records were sealed." The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Jacob looked at Victoria, whose face had gone pale as the full implications became clear. The private investigator she'd been traveling to meet was unnecessary now. Her lost brother's uncle was standing in Jacob's driveway, examining the very Ferrari that had brought all of them together through circumstances that seemed too extraordinary to be coincidental. "This isn't possible," Victoria whispered, her composure finally cracking under the weight of the moment. "I've been searching for Marcus for 3 years. I've hired investigators, spent thousands of dollars tracking down leads that went nowhere, and now he's your nephew? This can't be happening." Detective Rodriguez's expression shifted from professional interest to personal concern. "Marcus, this is Uncle Carlos. I need you to come to Millbrook immediately. There's something happening here that you need to see for yourself. Bring your identification and any documents you have about your adoption. Trust me on this, it's important." Jacob watched the conversation unfold with a mixture of amazement and growing understanding. The mysterious family matter that had brought Victoria to his neighborhood wasn't just about recovering stolen property. It was about reuniting siblings who had been deliberately separated by someone who profited from their loss. The Ferrari breakdown that had seemed like simple mechanical failure was actually the catalyst for a family reunion that had been decades in the making. Emma approached cautiously from the porch, her 7-year-old instincts telling her that something momentous was happening even if she couldn't understand the adult complexities involved. "Daddy, is Victoria going to find her brother now? The one she's been looking for?" The innocent question cut through the tension like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Jacob knelt down to Emma's level. struggling to find words that would explain the extraordinary convergence of events they were witnessing. "Yes, sweetheart, it looks like Victoria's brother is going to come here today, and they're going to meet each other again after a very long time." Victoria knelt beside Jacob, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she looked at Emma.
"Your daddy's garage is a very special place, Emma. It fixes more than just cars. Sometimes it helps fix families, too." The sound of a motorcycle approaching interrupted their conversation. A sleek sport bike rounded the corner and pulled into Jacob's driveway, its rider removing a helmet to reveal a man in his late 20s with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that bore a striking resemblance to Victoria's. Marcus Rodriguez stood beside his motorcycle, looking around the scene with confusion and growing recognition as his gaze settled on the woman kneeling beside Jacob and Emma. "Uncle Carlos?" Marcus said, his voice uncertain as he processed the assembled group. "What's this about? You said it was urgent, but I wasn't expecting—" His words trailed off as he looked directly at Victoria, and something in his expression shifted, a recognition that went deeper than conscious memory, the kind of connection that survives decades of separation and systematic attempts at erasure. Victoria rose slowly, her movements careful as if she were approaching something fragile and precious. "Marcus? Is your middle name Alexander? Do you remember anything about living in a big house with gardens and a garage full of old cars when you were very young?" Marcus stepped backward, his face pale with shock and growing comprehension. "How do you know that? I've had dreams about that place my whole life, but everyone told me it was just childhood imagination. No one could tell me anything about my life before the adoption." "Because I'm Victoria," she said simply, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I'm your sister. I've been looking for you for 3 years, and a broken Ferrari brought me to the one place in the world where I could find you." The moment of recognition between the siblings was electric. Marcus stared at Victoria with the intensity of someone seeing a ghost from his deepest memories, while she waited with the patience of someone who had been preparing for this moment through years of searching and disappointment. Jacob felt privileged to witness something so profound, the healing of a wound that had been deliberately inflicted by someone who profited from their separation. "The red car," Marcus whispered. His gaze shifted to the Ferrari. "I remember a red car like that in the garage at home. Dad used to let me sit in the driver's seat and pretend I was racing. You would always make me promise to be careful because it was special." Victoria nodded, her smile radiant despite her tears. "It was our father's favorite. He said someday you'd be old enough to drive it properly, and he wanted to teach you everything about taking care of it. That car has been waiting for you to come home, Marcus. They all have." 3 months later, Jacob's driveway had been transformed into something resembling a small automotive restoration facility. Marcus had relocated his business to Millbrook, partnering with Jacob to create a specialty garage that combined Jacob's neighborhood reputation with Marcus's expertise in high-end European vehicles. The partnership had evolved naturally from their shared commitment to quality craftsmanship and honest dealing, but also from the bonds forged during those extraordinary days when a broken Ferrari had reunited a family. Victoria split her time between her business commitments in the city and the small house she'd purchased 2 blocks from Jacob's home. The legal battle with Richard Blackstone had concluded with his conviction on multiple fraud charges and the return of the entire automotive collection to Victoria and Marcus. Rather than selling the cars for profit, they had decided to establish a foundation that provided automotive education scholarships for children from working families, ensuring that practical skills remained accessible to future generations. Emma had become the unofficial mascot of the expanded automotive restoration business, her operational talents now applied to managing parts inventories for both domestic and imported vehicles. She wore a custom pair of coveralls with her name embroidered on the pocket and carried a clipboard with the serious air of an oversized supervisor.
The demeanor of someone who understood that proper documentation was essential for successful automotive repair. The foundation received its final approval yesterday, Victoria announced, entering the garage where Jacob and Marcus were installing a new hydraulic lift system. "We can begin accepting scholarship applications next month, and the first automotive summer camp for neighborhood kids starts in June." Jacob wiped his hands on a shop rag, still adjusting to the reality that his simple driveway operation had become the centerpiece of something much larger and more meaningful. The success felt surreal, but it was anchored by the daily satisfaction of work he understood and relationships that had grown organically from shared challenges and mutual respect. "Mrs. Patterson called," Marcus added, consulting his phone. "She wants to know if we can look at her granddaughter's Honda next week. Apparently, our reputation is spreading beyond the immediate neighborhood." The casual way Marcus referred to their shared reputation reflected how naturally he had integrated into the community that had embraced Jacob 5 years earlier. Brothers who had been separated by fraud and manipulation had found their way back to each other through the intersection of mechanical expertise and genuine human connection, creating something stronger than either could have achieved alone. Detective Rodriguez, who had become a regular weekend visitor, arrived carrying a cooler full of his famous barbecue and wearing the relaxed expression of someone enjoying well-earned retirement. The resolution of the Blackstone case had been the capstone of his career, and he'd chosen to spend his newfound free time helping his nephew and Victoria navigate their complicated family reconstruction. "Emma," he called, "I brought those spark plug diagrams you wanted to see. The ones that show the differences between heat ranges for different engine applications." Emma ran to him with the enthusiasm of a child who had discovered that learning could be as exciting as playing, especially when the adults in her life treated her curiosity with genuine respect and patience. The garage had become her classroom in ways that extended far beyond automotive education, teaching her about family bonds, community support, and the satisfaction that came from work well done. As the afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees, casting familiar patterns of light and shadow across their workspace, Jacob found himself reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events that had brought them all together. A mechanical breakdown that could have been a simple repair job had revealed connections and possibilities none of them could have imagined. Victoria appeared at his side, her hand finding his with the natural ease of partnership that had developed through months of shared challenges and growing trust. "Any regrets about how complicated your life has become?" she asked with a smile that suggested she already knew his answer. Jacob looked around at the scene before them, Marcus explaining engine timing to Emma, while Detective Rodriguez prepared food for their extended family gathering. The Ferrari, fully restored and gleaming in the driveway, now serving as a symbol of recovery and reunion rather than luxury and status. His modest garage transformed into something that served his community while honoring the skills and relationships that had always been his greatest assets. "No regrets," he said simply. "Some complications turn out to be blessings in disguise." Emma ran to them, her clipboard forgotten in her excitement about the afternoon's technical discoveries. "Daddy, Uncle Marcus says I can help him rebuild a transmission next week if it's okay with you and Victoria. A real transmission, not just watching." The title she'd assigned to Victoria had emerged naturally, without formal discussion or awkward negotiations. Emma's instinctive understanding of family relationships had created connections that honored both biological bonds and chosen commitments, weaving them together into something stronger than either could have achieved alone.
Stronger than either could have been separately. "That sounds like an excellent learning opportunity," Victoria replied, kneeling to Emma's level with the attention and patience that had become as natural to her as breathing. "But we'll need to make sure you have proper safety equipment for heavy mechanical work." Jacob watched this interaction with the contentment of someone who had discovered that the best outcomes often emerged from circumstances that initially appeared to be simple problems requiring straightforward solutions. His driveway garage had fixed more than automotive systems. It had repaired families, built communities, and created possibilities that none of them had dared to imagine when a broken Ferrari first rolled to a stop outside his chain-link fence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.